Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Maths for this week. This week we're going to be looking at a concept that children do struggle with. So we're going to make it very repetitive. You're going to see the same diagrams and the same reminders a lot because people do struggle with it. So we're going to be converting measurements. Today we're going to look at some measurements in general, but we're going to mainly stick to length in the second half. So we're going to be converting between millimetres and metres or metres and kilometres, but we're going to be using decimals and some fractions in order to do that. So we'll take it through together and we're going to be doing this for the whole week. Right, so before we start, do you remember when we looked at decimals, we looked at, and using our sliders, we looked at that if you times something by 10 and then times it by 10 again, it's the same as timesing it by 100. And if you times something by 10 and then by 10 again and then by 10 again, it's the same as timesing it by 1,000. Or timesing it by 10 and then timesing it by 100 is the same as timesing it by 1,000. And then over on the red side, you can see that all of that also works in the reverse, in the inverse for division. So if I were to, let me just get a pen here. If I were to say we're going to have, for example, 32, and if we times that by 10 and then times it by 10 again, actually I won't have, let's do 3.2 because I won't have enough room on my chart. So if I times it by 10 and times it by 10 again, that 3 will move, times it by 10 to here, times it by 10 again. And that's the same as timesing it by 100, which is moving it twice. Don't forget the number of zeros shows you how many times you move it. So timesing it by 10 would give us 32, but timesing it by 10 again would then give us, put the 3 there, the 2 there, and then of course we need the placeholder, would give us 320. And that's the same as timesing it by 10, timesing it by 10 again, which is the same as timesing it by 100. And then if we were to do it again, we'd have the 3 out here. Sorry, my mouse moved on to the next page. So what I was saying there was if we times it, we had a 320, and if I were to times, it was 3.2, didn't I? And if I times that by 10, and then 10, and then 10 again, our 3 would go from here to here to here, and then into our thousands column here. So it would end up being 3,200. We're going to keep coming back to this a lot, and the division works the same in reverse, so you get smaller. So just remember, timesing by 10, timesing by 10 again is the same as timesing by 100. Okay, timesing by 10, timesing by 10, timesing by 10 is the same as timesing by 1,000, and timesing by 10, timesing by 100 is the same as timesing by 1,000. Okay. Right, what I'm going to ask you to do in a second is to pause the video, and I want you to list as many units of measurement as you can to do with all of these things. So we have capacity here, we have mass here, which is slightly different to weight, so we call it mass in maths, sorry. We've got money, we've got time, and we've got length. The units I want you to list are metric units. So I don't want what we call imperial at the moment, which are things like inches, miles are actually imperial. What else was there? Stones and pounds, they're imperial. And obviously shillings. I don't think any of us would use those now. So try and list as many units of measurement as you can, such as centimetres, millimetres, things like that. Okay, so pause and list as many as you can for each of those things now. Okay, here's the list that I got. Let's see if you got anything similar. Now, there are definitely ones either side of this, and I'm sure some of you know what is smaller than a second, for example. I'm sure some of you know what's smaller than a millimetre, maybe. But I've just listed the ones that we're going to be using. And in fact, we won't use all of these. So for capacity, which is for measuring liquid, we have millilitres, or ml for short, centilitres, which again we don't use very often, and then litres. And there is more than that, but that's all we're going to use for the moment. For mass, grams, again, you can get smaller, but that's where we're going to start. Kilograms and tons. For length, we've got millimeters, centimeters, meters, kilometers. And it does go again smaller and bigger, but that's the one, they're the ones we're going to use. Miles and metric, so we're not going to be using miles. Time, again, I'm sure some of you know what's smaller than a second, but we're going to go for seconds, minutes, hours. There are lots for time: days, weeks, fortnights, months, years, decades, centuries, millennia. There are an awful lot. And money, well, I could really only think of pounds and pence at the moment for British money, which is what we're going to be thinking about. Right, I'm wondering whether any of you know what these prefixes actually mean. I've got a mixture of capitals and lowercase there for the beginnings. They should all be lowercase, really. So do any of you know what kilo means? Do any of you know what milli means? Does any of you know what centi means? Can you tell me now if you do? Cent, some of you might definitely be able to work out. Let's have a look. Okay, so kilo derives from a Greek word, and it actually means thousand, as does milli, but that derives from Latin. And that's why we have them both, because our language is so rich and made up of so many different languages from so many different cultures. We've got both the Greek and the Latin, and the Latin is obviously the Roman. So we've got the Greek and the Latin words for thousand, which is really confusing. It would be so much better if we only had one, but there we go. So we have to remember that both kilo and milli mean 1,000. Okay, so million, although you might be thinking, well, why is million thousand? Because it's more than 1,000. It's because it's 1,000 thousands. That's why. So it's still got that prefix of milli because it's 1,000 thousands. So killi and milli both mean 1,000, and then cent means 100, or centi is hundredth. And they're both Latin as well. I'm sure you knew that one because you might have known things like a century is 100 years. So you may have got that one. Okay, so it's really useful to know those prefixes. So in your head, you can be thinking kilo, milli, 1,000, cent, 100. Okay, just quickly before we move on. So bearing that in mind, can you seek and destroy the imposter? So one of these is wrong. One of them is wrong. It says here 1,000 grams equals a kilogram, 1,000 millilitres equals 1 litre, 1,000 centimetres equals 1 metre, and 1,000 metres equals 1 kilometre. So think back to those prefixes we just looked at. Which one of these do you think is wrong? Put your finger on the screen on the one you think is wrong. Did you say this one? Well done if you did. How many centimetres are there in a metre? Can you tell me? There are 100 cent. That's where that prefix is cent. There are 100 centimetres in a metre, not 1,000. All the rest are 1,000, but there are 100 centimetres in a metre. Here's another chart that you're going to see repeated a lot to help you remember. So it's got some equivalent values on it. So with capacity, which is our liquid again, 1 litre is the same as 100 centilitres. We don't use centilitres very much at all, so you won't hear this one much. The important one is that it's 1,000 millilitres. So 1 litre is 1,000 millilitres. 1 kilogram is 1,000 grams. 1 kilometre is 1,000 metres. There's our kilo, milli, there's all our thousands. And then 1 metre is 100 centimetres, but it's also 1,000 millimetres as well. Do you know how many millimetres there are in a centimetre? How many millimetres in a centimetre? Just in one of those. There are 10. 10 millimetres in a centimetre. Could have added that on, couldn't I? Right. Now, I want you to imagine this counting stick represents 1 kilometre. Okay? So 1 kilometre. You might have gone out and run a kilometre. So can you tell me how much each of these sections is worth? There are 10 of them. So tell me again, how many meters were there in a kilometre? Can you remember? Kilo. There were 1,000 meters in a kilometre. So I've got to think, how much would each of these sections be worth? If they were worth 10 each, I'd have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and I need to get to 1,000. So that seems like it's 10 times smaller than I need it to be, which means I need to make my jumps 10 times bigger. So rather than jumping in tens, I'm going to jump in hundreds. Let's see if that gets us there. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. That's better. So now I know that each of these is worth 100 meters. So that would be 200 there. 300. Hang on, I've started in the wrong place, haven't I? Started on 0, silly Miss Gillam. Right, let's try that again. So here would be 100 meters. Here would be 200 meters. What will be here? 300 meters. Count with me. 400 meters. Our halfway point is 500 meters. Then we've got 600 meters, 700 meters, 800 meters, 900 meters, and then 1,000 meters, which is the same as a kilometre. Right, let's look at those as decimals. Now, each of those, our stick is split into 10 pieces, which means each block of colour is worth 1/10, isn't it? If it's split into 10, each must be worth 1/10. And 1/10, if you think about your place value chart, that means we've got no holes, decimal point, and then 1/10. 0.1 would be the first tenth. So what will be our next tenth as a decimal? Still haven't got any holes because the holes are up here with our kilometre. So the next one would be 0.2. What would the next one be? 0.3. Count with me. 0.4, 0.5, our halfway point, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, and then a hole, which is our hole is our kilometre, or 1,000 metres. Let's look at those as fractions. Now look at this pattern here. We said it was 1/10, and that's how you write it as a fraction. 1/10, 1 out of 10. We've got 3 out of 10, so what will be here? Can you tell me? It would be 2/10. We've got our 3/10. Tell me what will be next? 4/10. Then our halfway mark, which is 5/10. Keep counting with me. 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and 9/10. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and of course this would be 10/10. 10/10. Okay, thank you for helping me fill that in. I just want you to take a second to look at that. Look at the decimals. Sorry, some of the zeros look like sixes. It's this tricky pen. So have a look at the decimals, how that works, 0.1, 0.2, etc. Have a look at the fractions, all out of 10, because there are 10 sections. And then have a look at how much each increment is worth, 100 metres. And of course, right at the beginning, these would all be 0 and 0 metres. Okay, we're going to keep coming back to that. Now, what about if we were going upwards, like litres would be? So on a measuring jug, your scale would actually go up rather than go horizontally. Do you remember that word? We've got vertically, horizontally. So now we're going vertically. But it would be exactly the same. 1 litre is 1,000 millilitres. So we've got 0 millilitres down here. Let's bring it out a bit more. So the next one will be how many millilitres would the next jump be? 100 millilitres. And then, oh, mouse. Right, then count up the next one with me. 200 millilitres, 300 millilitres, 400 millilitres. Our halfway point would be 500 millilitres, then 600 millilitres, 700 millilitres, 800 millilitres, and 900 millilitres. Okay, so can we put in the decimals? 0 down here. Our whole isn't till up the top, so our whole would be 1. So here we've got 0 point, what was it, can you remember? It's out of 10, there are 10 sections, so 1/10, which is 0.1. Then count with me, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, our halfway point is 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 1. Okay, and what about our fractions? There are 10 sections, so it's all out of 10. So down here we've got 1/10, we've got 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, our halfway point, which is 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and a whole up there. Exactly the same as the horizontal one, but this one's going vertically. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken each of those 10 sections and split each of those into 10. So how many have I got all together now? I've got 10 lots of 10. Think back, 10 times 10 was 100. So I've now got 100 sections, which is why our fraction here is now out of 100. And we've counted 3 along to this dot here, which is out of 100, so 3 out of 100. So if I were to do my fraction here, out of 100, how far have I come? I'm halfway. So what's halfway? It's 50, isn't it? 50 out of 100. So here, our whole is 100 out of 100, which is confusing because that's actually 1,000 millilitres, isn't it? Because there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre. So our whole, which is 100 out of 100, is actually 1,000 in this case, which is quite confusing. So what was our 0.3 can stay as 0.3, but this time, instead of being 3 out of 10, we could also say it's what out of 100. That's not 0.3, is it? Why did I put 0.3 there? Let's try that again. So 0.3 would be here, wouldn't it? That was our 0.3. That one was 0.1, wasn't it? And 0.2. Okay, so before we said that was 3 out of 10. And it still is 3 out of 10, but how many is it out of 100? How far have we travelled out of 100? So we could also say 30 out of 100. But this line is really useful because we can go smaller. So we can say, although here is 0.6, which would be 6/10 or 60 out of 100, we could also come a bit further along to here, which is halfway between 0.6 and 0.7, and say we're actually 65 out of 100. Or we could go here and say we are, what's that? That would be 0.8 would be here. That's 0.8. So we could say we're 82, I think, out of 100. So we can make it more precise there. And we're going to be looking at how to work out how many millilitres that would be. But we're actually going to start with the length, so it would be millimetres for us today. Right, so let's look at length now. In the picture, what's the largest unit you can see? What would be the largest unit in this picture? I think the largest unit here would be a metre, isn't it? It's a metre stick. So for this one, the largest unit is a metre. And it says that in the speech bubble underneath. The largest unit is a metre. There is one of these on the stick. But there are smaller units. What are the smaller units you can see? Only just, but you can see them. You can see centimetres, and you can also see millimetres. So those are the smaller units you can see on that metre stick. Let's have a bit of a closer look now. So within a centimetre, you have 10 millimetres. Now those are not all shown on this picture. Here is 0 centimetres and here is 1 centimetre. And between those we've got our halfway point. So how many millimetres is that? If there are 10 in a centimetre, it will be half of 10, so that would be 5 millimetres here. So on this ruler, they're only showing 5 millimetres. They're not showing each individual one. We will have a look at some of those later. But here, this shows that 1 centimetre is 10 millimetres. So can you tell me how many millimetres there are in 3 centimetres? If there were 10 in 1, how many are there in 3? Right, so if we think about this, we now know that there are 10 in that section, which means there are also 10 in that section, which means there are also 10 in that section. So we're doing our 3 times 10, aren't we? We're doing our 10 3 times. So 10 times 3 is 30. There are 30 millimetres in 3 centimetres. Right, now let's do it the other way round. We've got millimetres, but we want to know the centimetres. So this has taken us to 70 millimetres. I'm going to put that on my place value chart. How many centimetres is that? Well, do you remember last time I multiplied, didn't I? I did 10 times 3. And this time I've got the millimetres, but I want to find the centimetres. So instead of multiplying, what am I going to do? I'm going to divide. So there's only 1 0 on the end of 10, so I'm only going to move them once to the right. So my 0 would end up over here and my 7 in there. And of course we don't need that 0 because it would just be a placeholder. So I can say that there are 7 centimetres in 70 millimetres. And actually the diagram does show us that, doesn't it? Right, I'd like you to pause the video and tell me how long each line is. And it does ask you to give it in centimetres and millimetres. So that would mean, for example, let's look at C here. On C, I would say it's gone past the 8, but not to the 9. So it's 8 centimetres and, oh, where's that red line? I think that's 2. It's a bit tricky to see. I think it's 2. It might be 3. No, it's 2. So 8 centimetres, 2 millimetres. That's how I want you to write down your answers on your piece of paper. There isn't a Google slide for this, just a piece of paper. So pause and do that now. Right, let's look at these together. So we've done C already. The top one stops dead on a centimetre, doesn't it? So the top one is 6 centimetres. That was nice and easy. The next one down I can see is on that halfway mark between 4 and 5, and half of 10 is 5. So I think it's 4 centimetres, 5 millimetres. Now the next one's tricky because it doesn't start at 0. So it goes up to 7 centimetres and 3 millimetres. But 2 of those centimetres haven't been used. So I'm going to take 2 away from 7, which is 5. So it will be 5 centimetres and 3 millimetres. I could just count from the 2 if I wasn't sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the 3 millimetres. So I could do it that way. Well done if you got all of those. Right, this slide you're going to see every day this week. This is a tricky one that you're going to see every day. So I'm going to say it today and then I'll keep saying it. So we'll really try and get it. To convert from a smaller unit to a larger unit, you need to divide, which means you need to slide to the right. So centimetres to metres. So centimetres is smaller, metres is bigger. You divide by 100. Millimetres to centimetres, you divide by 10. Metres to kilometres, you divide by 1,000. So smaller to bigger, you divide. But to convert from the larger to the smaller, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to multiply. Metres to centimetres, multiply. Centimetres to millimetres, multiply. kilometers to meters, multiply. So we're going to keep saying that over and over again. So to go from smaller to bigger, you divide. To go from bigger to smaller, you multiply. Okay, just say that with me. To go from smaller to bigger, you divide. And again, to go from smaller to bigger, you divide. To go from bigger to smaller, you multiply. And again, to go from bigger to smaller, you multiply. We'll keep going over that, so don't worry if you're going to get it confused. Right, what I'd like you to do now is pause again, and you're going to write each of these measurements out in centimetres. Okay, so we have done the first one already, actually. We did that on the diagram. How many centimetres were there in 30 millimetres? This diagram at the bottom will help you. 1 centimetre is the same as 10 millimetres. So here is 1 millimetre. Okay, so this will get me to 10 millimetres. How many then centimetres will be in 30? So that's this 3 times, which means it will also be this 3 times. And don't forget, because we're going from a smaller to a bigger, we're going to divide. So it will be 30 divided by 10 in this case. When you get to 23 and 5, you will need decimals. Okay, you're going to need a decimal. I will give you a clue. You're going to have a 1 digit either side of your decimal here. Okay, and this bottom one, you're going to need a placeholder in there somewhere. Have a go. Those bottom 2 are harder. Okay, have a go, pause, and then come back when you're done. Okay, here are the answers. Hopefully you got some of those, even if the bottom ones are a bit tricky. So for 30 millimetres, just to show you a couple, 30 millimetres, because we're going from a smaller to a larger, we divide. And because there are 10 millimetres in a centimetre, we divide by 10. So we move it 1 place to the right. And then, of course, we don't need that placeholder. For the bottom 2, the 23, we're still going to divide it by 10. So the 3 moves to here. Remember, we can't move it into the decimal place column, and the 2 moves to here. So it's 2.3 centimetres. And for the 5 millimetres, it's only half a centimetre, so it's 0.5. How did you do with those? Remember, I did say this is tricky. Okay, we're going to have a go doing it the other way around now. So here you've got the centimetres. Now I want to know how many millimetres there are. So this time you're going to multiply by 10. So you're doing the opposite. Last time you divided by 10, now you need to multiply by 10. Again, you've got some decimals here. In fact, you've got more decimals. So remember, all you need to do is multiply by 10 or move the digits 1 place to the left. Have a go at those and then unpause when you're done. Okay, here are the answers to these ones. How did you do? Bit tricky? Let's have a look at a couple of these. The 2 centimetres was fairly easy. We know there are 10 centimetres in 1, so there are 10 millimetres in 1 centimetre, so there are 20 millimetres in 2 centimetres, and 30 millimetres in 3 centimetres. So those top 2 weren't too bad. Let's have a look at some of these decimals. Let's come on to 3.2 centimetres. Well, this time, remember, I'm multiplying by 10, which means my 3 will move 1 place to the left to here, and my 2 will jump over the decimal point and move to here, 32 millimetres. 0.8, that might have thrown you. The 0 will move to here, the 8 will move to here, but of course that would just be a placeholder, we don't need it. So we end up with just 8. And the same for all the others as well. Okay, if you're not sure, if you didn't get the answers right, have a really close look now. None of the digits have changed. All the digits are still there. 3.2, we've still got a 3, we've still got a 2. 0.8, we've got the 8, we got rid of the 0 because we didn't need it, but the 8's still there. 1.8, we've still got a 1, we've still got an 8. So all the digits are still there, we've just moved them. It's going back to those sliders, moving left and right, multiplying by 10, 100 and 1,000. That's all this is. Okay, we're going to have a look at one more thing today, I believe, which is a problem, and then we're going to leave it there for today. So well done with your work today. Let's have a look at the last problem. Eva and Amir are measuring the length of a paper clip. Eva says, I'm going to measure it in millimetres. Amir says, I'm going to measure it in centimetres. Whose unit of measurement is more appropriate? Explain your answer. Well, I mean, you could do either, I would say. Which one do you think you would use? I'd say a paper clip is about that length, isn't it? Which one would you use, do you think? I think I would use Amir's centimetres, because you could use the centimetres and then add some millimetres to it. You could say it's, I don't know, 3.2 centimetres. To me, that would make more sense than saying 32 millimetres. But actually, I think you could use either in this case. I think both of them could be correct. Amir has measured the length of the paperclip to 0.8. That's a tiny paperclip, isn't it? 0.8. That's really small. Okay, 0.8 centimetres. What answer will Eva get in millimetres? Okay, now we're not even a whole centimetre here. We've got a 0, so there's not even 1. We're less than 1. Can you remember how many millimetres there were in a centimetre? It was 10, wasn't it? So if there are 10, 0.1 must be 1 millimetre. 0.2 must be 2 millimetres. So can you tell me what 0.8 would be? It would be 8 millimetres. Again, look, the 8 is still there. We've just moved it. Well done if you said that. Okay, we're going to leave it there for today, but we're going to continue with length tomorrow. We're going to move on from millimetres and centimetres, and I think we're looking at centimetres and metres tomorrow. So we'll keep looking at what we're doing. We'll keep looking. Some of those slides will appear exactly the same again, just to remind you. So this is tricky, but we will be looking at it in school as well when we're all back together. So it's a tricky one. Well done for today. I didn't want anything handed in because a lot of it was just really trying to process it and think through it. So well done, guys. Keep thinking about that place value, sliding to the left and sliding to the right. And you'll see me on one of these again tomorrow.